Okay, picture this. You're living in the 12th century. You're a brilliant, deeply religious person. You spent your life studying astronomy, mathematics, and philosophy, and the logical, cold, hard arguments of science, they make complete, undeniable sense to you. But at the same time, you absolutely love your sacred scriptures and your tradition, and right here is where your world violently splits in two. I mean, how do you reconcile a universe described by cutting-edge science with the ancient stories of your faith? So on one hand, you've got Aristotelian science pushing this idea of an eternal, uncreated universe where ultimate truth is completely immaterial. But then on the other hand, you have the biblical tradition, which talks about a six-day creation, a God who literally gets angry, and all sorts of miraculous events. It's a massive dilemma. If you follow your intellect, you feel like you're abandoning your faith, right? But if you hold on to your faith, you feel like you're lying to your own mind. This agonizing psychological trap is exactly what the great medieval thinker Moses Maimonides, also known as the Rambam, called being perplexed. And back in the year 1190, he wrote an absolute masterpiece in Judeo-Arabic, specifically to save his brilliant student Joseph from this exact kind of despair.
Section 1. The Intellectual Trap.
Section 2. Decoding Divine Language.
Now, Maimonides starts off with a pretty massive ground rule. He says that because the human intellect is a direct gift from God, true science and true religion cannot actually contradict each other. They just can't. And this kicks off a total bombshell critique of how we read sacred texts. He argued that reading the Bible literally, especially when it comes to physical descriptions of God, is not just some harmless mistake. It's actually a super dangerous misunderstanding of reality. Think about it. You'll often see phrases in scripture like God's hand or God became angry. Well, this is anthropomorphism, basically assigning human traits to non-human entities. Maimonides states that believing the ultimate infinite source of existence has physical edges, parts, or, human temper tantrums is honestly a form of idolatry. Why? Because a physical body is finite. It can be broken down. So why even use this language in the text? Well, imagine trying to explain quantum mechanics to a 5-year-old. You wouldn't throw a bunch of high-level math at them. You'd use metaphors, like bouncing balls. The Bible does the exact same thing. It uses human metaphors as stepping stones so ordinary people can grasp the ungraspable. To really untangle all this scriptural confusion, Maimonides gives us a total masterclass in language by introducing the concept of homonyms. Now, a homonym is simply a word that sounds the exact same, but has an entirely different meaning based on its context. And to Maimonides, this is literally the master key to decoding divine language. We actually use homonyms all the time without even thinking about it. You can sit on a riverbank, you can deposit money in a bank, or an airplane can bank to the left. The word is identical every single time, but the physical reality of each is completely unrelated. So Maimonides argues that when we use human words like wise, good, or powerful for both humans and God, we are using them as homonyms. Human wisdom is something we acquire, and it's limited. But God's wisdom, it is identical to his infinite essence. It's on a completely different plane of reality altogether. And this brings us to what's probably Maimonides' most famous philosophical tool, negative theology, or apophatic theology. Since positive words ultimately mislead us, we can really only describe what God is not. Imagine trying to figure out what a ship is without ever having seen one. If you deduce that, well, it's not a piece of earth, it's not a house, it's not a creature, and it's not a plant, you're actually carving out the truth through negative space. Every single time you say God is not material or not bound by time, you're chipping away the false idols in your own mind and getting that much closer to an infinite truth. Section 3, Creation versus Eternity. So if God is completely beyond our physical reality, how exactly did the physical universe get here? Let's pivot for a second to the 12th century scientific worldview. The massive stakes of this debate really come down to this. If Aristotle is right and the universe is eternal, it means the universe is just an automatic byproduct of God, kind of like light shining from a sun. And if it's automatic, well, that completely eliminates a creator with free will, it makes miracles totally impossible, and it turns human history into just an endless, meaningless mechanical cycle. Naturally, a lot of religious thinkers just panicked and called science a heresy. But Maimonides respected human intellect way too much to do that. He looked the science squarely in the eye. Maimonides tackles Aristotle's logic with this totally fascinating analogy. So Aristotle proved that matter couldn't be created from nothing based on the current laws of physics, right? Well, imagine a boy born on a deserted island, raised only by his father. One day, the father explains that humans actually begin in a womb, submerged in fluid, completely unable to breathe air or eat. The boy looks at his fully grown body and rejects this as scientifically impossible. He thinks, if I stop breathing right now, I die. Therefore, I could never have survived in fluid. The boy's logic is perfectly sound based on a mature, fully formed system, but he is completely wrong about its origins. Maimonides points out that the laws of a fully formed universe simply do not apply to its original womb stage. Because of this brilliant observation, science couldn't definitively prove or disprove creation. It was essentially a philosophical tie. But check out this staggering quote from the explainer. Maimonides literally writes that if science did irrefutably prove the universe was eternal, he would not hesitate to reinterpret Genesis as a metaphor. I mean, that is some radical intellectual honesty right there. He ultimately chose biblical creation only because science ended in a tie, and creation actually allows for free will and human purpose. Once he establishes that creation is possible, he does something really cool. He naturalizes prophecy. Prophecy isn't some supernatural lightning bolt that just zaps you and bypasses human nature. No, a prophet has to achieve intellectual, moral, and imaginative perfection. Think of it like a radio. The cosmic energy, what medieval thinkers called the active intellect, is constantly broadcasting. If you have a perfectly tuned intellect as your antenna and a beautifully vivid imagination as your speaker, you become a natural receiver for that divine truth, translating it into metaphors to guide the rest of humanity.
Section 4. The root of evil.
Moving into the third part of this explainer, Maimonides tackles a deeply emotional issue, the problem of suffering. If God is all-powerful and all-wise, why is there so much absolute agony in the world? Well, he starts by defining evil not as some physical force created by God, but simply as a privation, a lack of good, just like darkness is just a lack of light. He breaks human suffering down into 3 categories. Natural evils are just the physics of a material world that decays. Things break down. Social evils are the horrific things we humans freely choose to do to one another. But it's that third category that hits the hardest. The vast majority of human misery, he argues, is entirely self-inflicted harm caused by a lack of wisdom. We obsess over materialism, we ruin our bodies and our relationships through terrible choices, and then after all that, we point at the sky and blame God.
This whole understanding of human nature builds directly into his view of biblical laws. He argues that God doesn't just hand down arbitrary rules. Every single law has a rational, educational purpose. Take animal sacrifice, for example. God used a process of divine pedagogy, basically gradual education. God didn't ask ancient people to suddenly drop their universal cultural language of devotion overnight. Instead, he redirected it. He restricted sacrifices to one God in one specific place, effectively lifting humanity out of barbarism and slowly transitioning us toward a future focused on silent prayer, study, and deep contemplation.
Section 5. Entering the King's Palace. To pull this entire philosophical journey together, Maimonides gives us this incredible allegory in Chapter 51, the parable of the palace. This is really where all the pieces of our explainer finally click into place. Imagine a massive, grand palace. Group 1 doesn't care about truth at all, so they're far outside the walls. Group 2 holds on to false beliefs, actively walking away from the palace. Group 3 are blind followers. They're well-meaning, sure, but they're lost outside. Group 4 are the legal experts. They memorize all the rules but completely ignore science, so they're permanently stuck at the gates. But look at Group 5, the scientists and philosophers who study the cosmos. They actually make it inside the inner court. And finally, Group 6, the prophets and true believers who combine perfect intellect with passionate love. They reach the king's inner chamber. Maimonides is boldly showing us that blindly obeying rules just isn't enough. You must deeply study reality through science to truly enter the king's presence.
As you can probably guess, this book sparked an absolute intellectual civil war. Traditionalists were horrified. I mean, he called creation a potential metaphor and elevated pagan philosophers like Aristotle. Copies of this very book were actually burned in the streets by the Inquisition in Montpellier. Yet, the ideas completely survived the fire. The guide went on to deeply shape some of the greatest minds in Western history, from Thomas Aquinas to Baruch Spinoza, and all the way to Leibniz. Ultimately, this 800-year-old masterpiece stands as a brilliant bridge over the chasm of our own deeply divided era. He proves that we really don't have to commit intellectual suicide to live a life of profound, meaningful faith. So I want to leave you with this final thought. If ultimate truth is truly unified, what false contradictions between your own mind and your soul are you still holding on to today? It's time to drop those biases, look way past the literal surface of things, and never, ever fear where the truth might lead you.
Please like and subscribe.